All right. Well, welcome to the Robots Roundtable, episode 7. Are we at 7 already? I think it's like 7 or 8, something like that. This week we have a new guest, and before I get into that, let me explain the show. I guess I should go in order here. The Robots Roundtable is the podcast where the hosts from the different Robots radio podcasts get together to bring up fun and interesting and sometimes deep and dark things to talk about, and we hang out, and then we have a funny little competition at the end. So thanks for joining me, guys. This week we have Ken from Chad, a Fallout 76 story, who's usually here most weeks. How's it going, Ken?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. And
I missed you guys last week.
Yeah, we missed you too. Cornholio and I had a fairly long discussion about some deep stuff, and it was good. But Cornholio couldn't make it today because his audio was bouncing all of our audio back to us, and it would have been a terrible episode. So he's not here. But we do have from under the Shroud, Ian, our brand newest of the podcasts to the podcast family. Welcome, Ian.
Hey, thanks. It's great to be here, guys. I'm looking forward to joining the team.
Yeah, it's exciting. It's kind of cool to have both you and Ken here because you guys are, I don't know what we should call them, radio theater type podcasts?
Audio dramatists.
Modern radio dramatist? I don't know.
Overly dramatic. We'll just go with that. You guys are the overly dramatic ones. Welcome. And this week, you know what? I didn't check with each of you to see exactly what we're talking about this week, so it's kind of a surprise for everyone. But would either of you like to go first?
Chad, I cede the floor to you. Ken, rather.
Actually, I think you should go. This is your first show. It's all about you.
Well, then I'll take it away. So, hi, gang. I'm Ian. I write, produce, and do a lot of the voices for Under the Shroud. Our show's a different kind of take on urban fantasy. All original content, and it's set in Baltimore City, which is currently in the news. I don't know if you guys have been watching that mess play out.
Yeah. But that's actually very interesting that it's in the same location as your podcast.
Yeah. Well,
very timely.
It's timely. It's also somewhat fitting to the material. I didn't grow up in West Baltimore, but I spent a fair amount of time for those of you who aren't hip to it, Donald Trump recently came after not just Baltimore, but West Baltimore specifically. And I used the term infestation, which, as many of us know, is his code for racism. And I spent a lot of time out there. I'm definitely from that town. And it was a dumb choice on his part, both one of his continuing stupid political choices, but also why would you pick a verbal battle with an area that is reputed for both hardworking individuals and also gang violence? That just seems like a stupid call. But anyway, the reason it's sort of fitting for my show is that my show is largely about the more violent aspects of Baltimore City. It's set, like I said, in a fantasy environment, so none of it is factual in any way, shape, or form. But it does pull from Baltimore's continuing reputation as first started off in homicide, life on the killing streets, and continuing with The Wire. And it stars a humble half-demon played by myself, Corin Black, who's a active addict and a cab driver. And the show takes a couple of different... I came at the storytelling from a couple different angles. I wanted to make sure that each episode, as we got started, was accessible. So the first 12 episodes are going to be largely character vignettes. We have Corin driving his cab. Somebody gets into the cab. Any variety of odd fantasy monster, other fantasy character, and he tries to get them where they're going. They encounter some sort of problem, and then his life just gets worse from there.
Yeah, and then it gets more and more complex as it goes. With references back to some of the things that he's previously gone through, or I've listened through a number of the episodes. It's very well done, and it really, the thing I like about the show a lot is that it scratches that Buffy the Vampire Slayer itch that demons living in the real world, but not everybody knows that they're there, but they sure know that they're there. There's this huge backstory about each of the different kinds and all sorts of things going on.
Yeah, and thank you very much for saying that. I appreciate it. And Buffy has proven to be, it was one of those things where I didn't realize how much I was drawing on the show as an influence until my girlfriend recommended we start rewatching it. And I realized that not only does it have that urban fantasy thing of like, yeah, there's creatures running around and most people don't see them, but the ones who do suffer for it. There's also a fair amount of Joss Whedon's, that heartwarming thing he does where it's childish and fun and appreciable on sort of a gut level, but then there's also
an episode like The Body.
Right.
That is how they didn't win so many awards for that, or maybe they did and I missed it. That episode is by far one of the best TV episodes produced ever of any show. It's just masterfully done.
Which one was that again? What happened in that one?
The one in which her mom died. The way in which it's filmed and done perfectly represents, if anyone has lost someone close to them, how you feel and the world turning out and losing touch with reality and being sick to your stomach, and all of these things are perfectly represented in that episode to make you, even she has this fantasy flashback of arriving in time and saving her mom. And if you've ever lost a family member like I have, these kind of scenarios, these impossible scenarios go through their head, making you wonder what you could have done different. And so you see all of this play out. It's an amazing episode. It was very different from the rest of the series.
You guys keep talking. I'm going to close the doors because the dogs are barking, but keep going.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that episode just really was amazing. But yeah, I gotta listen to your show, and I haven't listened yet.
Give it a shot sometime. See if it's for you. It's definitely not for everybody. But I think that a lot of that has to do with the topic material. I've spent a fair amount of time picking on racists because they're wonderfully horrible villains. But that's also a topic that occasionally makes people anxious. Like I said, the main character is an addict, and that was one of the things that was really important to me about developing the show, was that we live in a wonderful time where disenfranchised peoples are being given a new voice. There's a lot of opposition to those voices, but the vast diversity of people who've been sort of cut off, ignored, is coming together. And one of the voices that I don't hear, and I think enough of, are addicts. It's just not something that's necessarily brought to light. And if they are addressed, usually it's solely as a means to show somebody who's suffering, which comes with the baggage, but not necessarily all of the time. Life is not just a black and white issue just because you've got a habit or a problem. It's still got its shades of gray.
Well, even in the way that addicts are represented in TV tropes or movies, it is very black and white. Like you see, okay, here's this loser who just can't kick this habit. Why can't they just stop? It's not that easy. For one thing, you can have genetic issues that make you predisposed towards becoming an addict in the first place. And the other thing is the disease of mental health in this country that leads people to get that far anyway, where you don't have an escape from reality other than being able to take something to let you detach or feel or not feel.
Right. And one thing that I find fascinating is that even the TV shows, whatever storytelling media that do address this, usually don't acknowledge that addicts are aware of what's going on around them. They're aware of how they're the butt of the jokes. And one thing I did, I think it was the first episode. So one of the setups for Under the Shroud is that he is self-aware that he's doing a podcast. The extranatural, arcane, magical creatures don't usually access the internet. So he's somewhat allowed to broadcast what he's going through and the espionage and crime he's involved with, because the conceit is nobody else who would care about the extranatural is listening in. And the reason that he starts it is because he wants to start a Patreon account to make some money for his drug habit. And
he's just motivated by it. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's like, because that is a lot of how that world works.
Feed my habit. Find me on patreon.com/.
Right. Exactly.
That's awesome.
And it's a fun bit to play with. And he, sort of acknowledges the grimness of that issue, but also is straightforward about it. And at one point in the pilot, he even mentions that drug addiction is a public health issue, which it is, and it's not addressed as such. And then he goes further to completely skew that fact and say, so if you're giving me money for my habit, you're solving public health. And which you could take as a sort of dark poke at drug addicts, but also as someone who's has struggled on and off with addiction in whatever regards, I can tell you that people, those jokes get made in the quote room, so to speak. The rooms being anonymous meetings, Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, whatever. Those are people with a great sense of humor. Those are people with a lot of humility who know how to poke fun at their own problem. And that is the single biggest thing that I feel like you don't see in addict representation, is that these people are not idiots.
Yeah, they're self-aware. There's a self-awareness. Yeah.
Extraordinarily self-aware, and in many ways more self-aware than your average bear, because it is fairly easy. I mean, I recommend self-reflection to everyone. And it's fairly easy if you're living in modern everyday life to just sort of like steam through and be who you got to be and get to work every day and not stare at yourself in the mirror and wonder what's actually going on behind your eyes. I guarantee you that if you've been up for 3 days and you can't sleep and everybody else is gone, that you are going to have some very deep and profound self-reflective moments. You might be telling yourself some weird lies in amongst that, but you have looked into the mirror and seen something very real there, and probably have learned how to joke about it in a way that not a lot of other people can. I'm not saying that, hey, kids, go out there, get addicted to drugs because you'll learn more about yourself. That's
have this experience. Experience this.
But I am saying that that aspect of the culture is often left to the sidelines.
Yeah.
And I thought it'd be a fun way to acknowledge that would be to do so through a fantasy tale. Yeah.
Where is your because I'm kind of curious how you write, being a storyteller. Where do you think a lot of your storylines come from? Is it from personal experiences or just things that just kind of pop into your head and you don't really know where they come from?
Oh, I'm a proud, firm believer that what is it? What is that saying? It's such a good one. Good artists borrow, great artists steal.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's a phrase that can be misused, but I'm particularly with the kind of show that I write, which can be cartoonish at times, and certainly is exaggerated.
Mine isn't at all.
You guys don't have that in common at all.
No.
And we're not all sarcastic.
Yeah, no. So when I'm coming up with ideas, a lot of times it starts with, so I'm working on a 3-act special that we're going to do for our mid-season. Excuse me. We're going to release 3 episodes back to back to back that all tell one single story. And I knew I wanted...
Uh-oh. I think you cut out.
You fell into the void again.
You turned into a robot and disappeared.
Come back from the void.
Well, we'll give him a minute. We can always edit this out. Fix it in post. No problem. I wonder if he's just like going on and on and on and on and doesn't realize and can't hear us either.
He probably is.
Bald from Hollywood.
Oh, there you are. Hey!
It's exactly that.
We lost you for like the last minute. You might have to go back.
We heard none of that.
Oh, did you really?
Yeah, it's like it's like your signal dropped.
Disastrous. That was so... I was killing it. Anyway, so in terms of character idea creation, I tend to start with a bead that I've stolen from elsewhere, and then I dive back in and just start throwing more stuff on the fire.
Yep.
Yeah.
Cool.
There's a fair amount of Looney Tunes-esque stuff, and I try to couch characters that are wild and extreme with very genuine human intentions. And what I found is that I did an episode recently that worked around the Dr. Frankenstein idea, and I made their intention primarily based around necrophilia, but I couched that in necrophilia and meth addiction, but I couched that in just a need to understand what the human experience is like. And people responded to that. People really like those characters. Please tell me that I'm coming across right now.
Yes, we can hear you.
Excellent.
Yeah, man, it's both really dark and human at the same time. That's
about the best compliment I can get.
Right. It's like, and I think that's one of the reasons why we go to fiction or even video games. A number of us on the network play video games. And there's something about these extreme situations that bring out the most, that distill things down to the most human reactions, the most human decisions. It's in those extreme times that you really see what somebody's made out of, or you get to the core of what they're seeking.
That's the truth. It's reality.
Yeah. Interesting. So what's your favorite part about doing the show so far? Because you've been doing it for how long now?
We launched on April 17th, and been going every other week, strong and steady since then, with a couple bonus episodes here and there. Favorite part about doing the show, I mean, there's two answers to that. There's the creative aspect, and then there's the finally, for once in my life, getting having an actual audience for the writing. I did a lot of prose beforehand that no one ever read. And so on the audience level, I work at a coffee shop, and there was a guy who he was a regular customer, but I'd never spoken to him before. And he ordered his coffee, looked shy at the ground, kind of kicked his feet around a little bit, went, "So you actually from Baltimore? Like, are those the real street names and shit?" And I'm like,
what? Oh, what? That's awesome.
Yeah, and it was just a mind-blowing experience. And
do you think he sought you out? Like he came and found you?
I think that another one of the regulars had sold him on the show in one of their chats out coffee shop's patio, and he'd started listening, and then he was waiting for the opportunity to fanboy out on me, which was an unbelievable experience.
Yeah, that's great. That's awesome.
And then in terms of creativity, this universe, the Shroud universe, I've been working on this for a while, and writing books that are not quite up to par in it, and coming up with these more epic and grand stories than Corin's as a cab driver. And what this show allows me to do is to go piece by piece and look at the basic building blocks of the world. I can instead of just having this is a little character, this is the Harpy race, for example. The Harpies are an allegory for me, for the lesbian commune my mom brought me up on. They are proud feminist warriors who are largely besmirched by the Titan patriarchy. And instead of just having that concept in my head and putting it in a grand epic scale, I can write stories that deal with what that looks like on the streets, on the day-to-day, where do they buy their coffee, things like that. And that opportunity has been really nice to just feel the everyday life of this urban fantasy universe. So yeah, that I would say is probably creatively the most rewarding for the show.
Very cool. Awesome. Yeah. It sounds like you're drawing a lot of different influences from one of the themes that we've talked and Ken and I have talked about is in doing our shows, drawing a lot of our experience together in all sorts of different places in our lives into one thing. And it's interesting how all of that stuff can kind of come together. And in your situation, it's more of it's all coming together as experience that feeds into your ability to tell stories. And
thank you.
Yeah, that's really cool. In my experience, some of it's around marketing and creating a podcast and really getting things out there, but also my life experience and just my interest in learning things and being able to note them on the shows that I do and that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's always so cool how we end up where we are and the path that got us there. And, the dark stuff too, which when you can kind of leverage it, you can turn it into something positive. It's a really neat thing.
Yeah, there's a philosophy that a buddy and I came up with many, many years ago that I hold with to this day. That is, oddly enough, a very Baltimore philosophy. I doubt many folks would put it this way in West Baltimore, but the idea is sort of a dystopian optimism, which is, first off, it's deeply Catholic in nature at its root. But it's this idea that, yeah, the world is a miserable, shitty place to be. There all sorts of atrocities are happening all the time, but it's probably going to be okay. And that is, I would say, the core theme of all of my work. That and the idea that amidst adversity, you can find small victory, and coming at pursuits from that angle of like that whole shoot for the moon and end up among the stars or whatever. Yeah. This idea that like you don't, on a small scale, you can accomplish something that makes somebody's day better. In Corrin's world, I'm trying to think of a good example of this. There's a bit where he gets a Titan nationalist co-opts him against his will to spread nationalist propaganda, and his little victory is that he's going to try to rat them out if he can. He's going to stay alive, and then I think he throws away a couple of their hate tracts, which is not a big victory. It's still a really bad situation, but he tries to find his victories where he can, and I think that's a valuable skill in our times and really in any times.
Yeah. There's a quote from talking about Buffy from Angel, and you guys might know this one, where he says, I just looked it up again. It's one of my favorite things on the show at all. And he says, if there's no glorious end to it all, if nothing we do matters, then all that matters is what we do, because that's all there is, what we do now, today. And that's something that resonated with me as, like a young adult, because just graduating, college and having been a philosophy and religion major, this idea that like, if the nature of the world is ultimately dark, and like you said, everything's terrible, then the greatest kindness, the greatest good we can possibly do is the simplest kindness to anybody else.
I love it.
That's, like you can't destroy all the bad guys and save the world, but you can make one person's world better. And that is profound, because that's all we can do, but that's the most you can do. So you might as well do it, that kind of thing. I don't know. It's one of those things that's resonated with me for a long time too.
For incredibly good reasons. We probably shouldn't discuss this right now. We should move on. But I do think that at some point we should talk about how that plays into the classic Dungeons and Dragons alignment scale. Something I think about far too often. Just the nature of good and evil versus law and order, how those can be realistically applied to everyday life.
Yeah, like in the way they juxtapose, they aren't necessarily aligned with each other.
Particularly like because good and evil actually don't mean much of anything at all. There's a sort of a feeling that you get when you're talking about good or you're talking about evil, or law versus chaos. There's a sensibility that you sort of know when you look at it, kind of thing. But in terms of somebody's actual identity, what defines them as a good, bad, ordered, or chaotic person, I think can be fairly well defined, not using those terms at all. And having grown up with few amigos and a whole lot of copies of Player's Handbook lying around, it's something that I thought about a lot as a kid and have some thoughts about.
Cool.
Yeah, characters aren't as black and white now as they used to be.
Oh God,
protagonists and antagonists, especially in shows that are popular now, it's not as clear cut. Even in our show, people really love Chad in ways.
And
I've noticed that.
Chad's supposed to be the villain, at least on the first episode, right? Like at the very beginning of the series, he's very much laid out as the like, oh my God, that guy. Ugh. Right?
Yeah, there's I don't want to spoil where we're going, but suffice to say, people really have reacted well to him. He has a likability to him in the same way that Susie does, and kind of her cheery, disturbing nature. The dynamic that the two of them have will continue to evolve over the season, but I struggle with that same kind of thing before I realize that it doesn't really matter. Part of the way that I was thinking about it is, in a survival situation, both Chad and Simon's way of going about doing things are perfectly valid in a situation where you're trying to survive and live. Ideals and what would be considered normal degrees of right and wrong become very blurred when it's about living and surviving and growing and thriving and trying to retake. Both Chad and Simon have very specific ideas on that, both of which end up being valid depending on your point of view.
Well, and there's something, I haven't listened enough to your show to say that this is what people find charming about Chad, but from what I recall, something that you can do with antagonists that's really great is that when you are, in theory, the bad guy, there's less of a reason for white lies. So that character can oftentimes say what either the protagonist or, more importantly, the audience is thinking, whereas the protagonist is restrained by morality to, be nice about things. And it's a really rewarding thing for an audience to hear, like, yeah, no, that is really how it is. I don't like what this guy's doing, or I wouldn't maybe do it myself, but what they're saying is true in a way that nobody else is having the balls to acknowledge. And it can be a release.
Yeah, so there's a coworker of mine who is one of the most interesting people that I've ever known. and I say this from the perspective of most people I meet, I feel like they kind of fit in within a certain category. I don't know if you guys feel this way too, but it's like, I mean, human beings, we're along a spectrum, but most people are in the bell curve in the middle. We've got commonalities and things, right?
For sure. The social contract requires that we're not too extreme.
Right. Yeah. We're pretty predictable. We're not too extreme. Well, this guy is very interesting because of his upbringing and stuff. And I'm not going to get into it too long, but one of the things that he does all the time is he's very straightforward and very honest about his intentions and who he is and what he values, and that he's just going to say things as they are, and that he thinks of himself first, and he's not sneaky and dark about it. He's actually very forward. So you understand exactly where he's coming from. And so in doing that, he's actually, everything he's saying, and I don't think he realizes the meta side of this, but what he's doing is he's putting the other person's needs ahead of himself by making it very clear to them where he's coming from and what his intentions are.
So this loops back around. I love that. This loops back around what I was saying about the alignment scale. So briefly, to sort of play out how I consider this Gary Gygax's invention, good would be better defined as altruism. It's giving of yourself to others. Mm-hmm. That is, excuse me, a very definable good act. Whereas evil is a selfish person or a selfish act.
Right, taking from others for your own need or want. And
that's not necessarily a good or bad thing. There are many instances of people, and one of the oldest sort of Arthurian ideals is that the reality that, like, the king should not be in one-on-one combat with the Black Knight. He should not be. His responsibility is to the people. So while it might be an altruistic thing for the king to go forward and fight the Black Knight, it's still the wrong thing to do, but it is technically good. Whereas, I'm trying to think of a flip side of that. So this guy, this coworker you're discussing, mm-hmm. him being straightforward about being self-serving, that's not a bad thing. I mean, he is being selfish.
Well, he's being honest about the thing about that himself that we all are anyway, and we just pretend not to be.
Exactly. And that is like, again, technically selfish.
Does
and
this
I would
dress
say,
look good on me? Yeah, it looks fantastic.
Right, right. I mean, he's just being upfront and honest with himself in a way that everybody else is lying to themselves all the time.
yeah, yeah, it's very rewarding. It's also something that I do not recommend in any way, shape, or form on social media. Honesty is not welcome there. It
You're
is
right.
not
No.
wanted. I'm not going to go any further with that one because that would be just very self-defeating. But just advice, those of you out there listening, do not be honest with your people on social media, particularly if they don't know what your face looks like. It's a bad call.
Cat memes always welcome.
Yeah, stick with the cat memes. Well, cool, man. This is a really interesting discussion and went all sorts of different ways than
Indeed it did.
initially expected. But anybody who hasn't given your show Under the Shroud a shot or listened to it yet should go check it out. Very entertaining, very well produced, and even little things that happen with the way that he's able to record or has to turn the recording off, and you and I talked about this a little bit a few weeks ago, or like something happens and you hear things happening in the background, but he's not able to narrate what's going on in the moment because it's a very stressful situation. Really creates this tension of like, oh, what's happening? And then he gets back and he's able to say like, so this is what just happened. And you're like, oh man. All right.
I think my favorite example of that is still in the second episode and I'm not going to give any more context because I want you guys to listen. But there's a bit where there's a car crash and we hear the car crash happening and then it cuts away. And then we hear some of the reaction to the car crash, but not any real clarity as to what's actually going on, just that there is violence happening. And then when we come back through dialogue with his compatriot, we get a sense as to what has just gone on. And one of the things I've been playing with my sound guy is leaving those breaks where there's silence immediately after a traumatic event, making them nice and healthy sized breaks, so to give the audience a bigger chance to go, oh my god, what the hell, and just let their pace, their heartbeat quicken up a little bit.
Did my player stop playing? What? Oh, okay, they're still there. What happened?
Am I here?
No, but that's the response of the person.
Oh yeah,
would be like, sorry, I'm such a good actor that I did that too well.
You killed it.
Yeah,
you killed it.
Well, thanks. Awesome. Well, let's move on. Let's Ken, do you have a topic for us today?
Just a few things. I did want to talk about Quakecon since some Fallout news came out that I'm really thrilled about. But we dropped episode 4. I could talk about that a little bit. It took me 3 weeks to edit because if you haven't listened to it yet, there's a lot going on in that one.
It's like 17 different voice actors, right?
It's 17 voice actors. It's an hour long, and it was kind of catch up. So the first 3 episodes and then the 4th of July special, you really hear everything pretty much from Simon's perspective until this episode when we start to hear things from Chad's perspective, and it's very little of Simon/me. There are some things that I've really enjoyed in that one. The pre-war sequence that I shared on an earlier episode wasn't the final cut, except the one that we released in episode 4. Creating that was fun. Being able to recreate the Fallout 3 door noise. I didn't use Bethesda assets. I recreated it using sound effects.
Nice.
To almost like 95% perfect. It just has some really interesting stuff. The dynamic between a lot of the characters and introducing the voice actors that are going to be really pivotal this season is really what that episode was all about. Because I didn't, when we first started these, they were very much journal based, and it was pretty much just me. But now the show's going in a completely different direction in terms of creating a lot more drama and characters and some plot threads going on.
Isn't that such a rewarding feeling when it starts to take off?
It is, yeah. It's also kind of stressful.
Oh, yeah.
Partly because you want to try and do characters justice. And so I have kind of A track and B track threads that I'm putting together throughout the remainder of the season to help to flesh out the majority of the main characters. So you get to know them a little more. Some characters I just enjoy writing for. I love writing Chad. He's every a-hole that you would love to be able to be, but can't because you couldn't stomach it. So writing him and his dialogue is really fantastic. That's Alex who voices it and does an amazing job. He's English, as in lives in England, but you wouldn't be able to tell from his voice at all.
Yeah, it's impressive work.
And he spent a lot of time really working on the voice to get it just right. Susie is voiced by Jessica, and that character and the voice that she does is so creepy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
As far as being this little girl frozen in time as a ghoul who just runs around with this little doll that has catchphrases and
I like that there's
possessed.
like this little bit of grit in her voice too. This like
yes,
this kind of thing. Yeah.
Yep.
Oh, it's good.
So I've got a quick question for you there.
Yeah.
So briefly, almost all of the recordings that I've done with voice actors are at my shitty little studio apartment, and it gives me an opportunity to direct them, and I've got my own style, blah blah blah. It sounds like you're virtually working with people, or at least occasionally, working with significant characters, just through the internet.
Correct. Yeah. Through Discord, I mean, we do read throughs together.
Mm-hmm.
In the same way as if we were physically sitting in a room together, kind of going through. So we'll read it through. I'll tell them what's supposed to be going on if their instincts for how to read something or what's going on is slightly off.
Mm-hmm.
Almost all of them, with the exception of Alex, none of us have really professional or semi-professional acting backgrounds.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody else just has really good instincts, and I spent some time with them to give them some insight into their character so that they kind of can picture that person and how they would deliver or react in a situation, which works pretty well. On that episode, because of timing, people recorded for the most part on their own.
Mm-hmm.
What I want to get towards is being able to record live on a per scene basis, so we can actually have some dialogue that could be a little more organic or improved in a way other than what I intended. I think would be fun.
Yeah, I think about that regularly because, as you may know, or as you almost certainly know, a lot of the ways that these that audio dramas can monetize is through touring shows, most famously by Night Vale, that they basically live on tour.
Yeah.
And I love that idea, but simultaneously, like, it seems like it's something where you need a fairly healthy budget to get started before you can really move up the scale on that. And I don't know, I sway back and forth a lot between fear of pacing getting thrown off by actors who are like getting excited and with each other and maybe reliant on gesture to convey the character, and also how amazing the pacing would be if everybody's in together and everybody can sort of feel each other out, and how incredible that would be. Yeah, I just think about it a lot, and I'm ambitious to get there one day, and wholly convinced that both as a director and probably as an actor, I do not have the skill set yet to pull it off. Not to mention the equipment is so much more expensive when you start throwing any number of voices in the mix.
Oh yeah, especially like even classic radio drama usually only had 2 or 3 actors in a studio.
Oh yeah, with the mic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And maybe like a Foley guy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Someone in the background with the washing board and the car doors.
Right, and crunching glass in a tray. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's actually how when I first wanted to do audio drama, which was a long time ago when podcasts were first sort of kicking off, I did a performance. There was a performance of 12 Angry Men that was a staged reading, but the guy, director, also a high school teacher of mine before that, wanted to do the whole thing as if it were a radio drama. So I ended up being the Foley guy for that, and it was such a cool experience. I don't use it, and we don't manufacture, I don't think, any of our sound effects, but it is a really cool way. Side note, on the topic of those old audio shows, I don't know if you guys have heard, I think it's called The Horror. It's a podcast that I think is just up on Stitcher.
Yeah, I listen to that every week.
It's so good.
Yeah.
Oh my God. I originally looked it up because I was looking for something to pass out to, and quickly discovered that I was getting too drawn in.
What was it called again? I think you blipped out for a second.
It's called The Horror.
It's just The Horror.
Yeah, it's the old school, like 1930s through the 1950s.
They go up through the 80s.
And then some. Yeah, I think they had some revival shows
Right.
on some of the older ones that they did that were recorded in the 80s, but it's a lot of classics. Lights Out. I think it's the Witch's Well, or there's a bunch of them.
And what's great about them is that it's not one of the many things that's great about these, other than the classic feel.
Oh, The Whistler. That's
The Whistler.
One. Yeah.
A lot of them, Black Mass is a great one.
Yep, that's a good one too.
A lot of these are, because they're from all these different radio companies that had different visions for their classic horror shows, you get a really wide variety of approaches to either the use of the audio format, or how they choose to tell the story, down to the nitty-gritty of what the story is. It's really, really interesting and a great listen. It's almost as good as Chad's story, but not quite.
Well, that's so much of how I write audio and how I wanted to produce this comes from that, because I'm a huge fan of those classic shows. They really were masters of storytelling and creating soundscapes that you could really feel and picture yourself in. It was really a different era. Arch Obler is a hero of mine. He's one of the greatest radio writers of all time. He wrote some really amazing episodes.
It's not horror, but another one that I highly recommend checking out that you can find on various old-time radio podcasts.
Suspense?
What's that?
Suspense.
Oh, Suspense is great as well. And actually,
you'll be in suspense.
Or X-0.
Oh, that's another good one too. Yep.
Great sci-fi. Really the harbinger of Black Mirror and Twilight Zone. But there's
a lot of X- is very Ray Bradbury.
Yeah.
Like very kind of retro futurism with weird
a lot of their
threads to it.
A lot of their mission was to adapt science fiction authors of all stripes from that period. So there's a fair amount of actual Ray Bradbury stories that have adapted. I'm not going to pretend like I remember the rest of those classic sci-fi authors' names, but usually at the beginning they'll announce, and it's adapted from Franz Kafka or whoever.
Yep.
And they're just great. But the one I wanted to mention, because it was had such a strong effect on how I wanted to produce our audio, and I think that Ken, you get a big kick out of it, was I think it's called Jeff Regan PI. It's one of the old police or private-eyed procedurals, and it's by Jack Webb, who later went on to make Dragnet.
Yep.
And the show takes advantage of silence in a way that I hadn't. That really, honestly, I don't think of any of the horror shows I've heard, which is even better format for silence. It just takes advantage of it in this wonderful way, and it's one of the sexiest shows that I've heard in old time drama, because like there's a fair amount of slow jazz detective narrating as he's going to walk someplace to do a thing, and that usual cadence. But in almost every episode there'll be a scene with a femme fatale, love interest, and the audio, the background scoring cuts off, sound effects cut off, and their voices get a little louder, and there's this breathy quality to it that is just, it is arousing in a purely audio medium using entirely clean language. And I just found it was very inspiring as to how you can take advantage of the medium.
Do they
That's
talk
awesome.
like this?
Okay.
Do they
It was
talk like
ASMR
this?
before it was
Oh.
ASMR.
Do they?
Well, yeah, she does. Usually the gal does, and he's doing his thing. I mean, and it's very classic
Hey there.
50s, relatively sexist.
Hey there, big
setup.
boy. Mm.
Right. Yeah. and these healthy, really the thing is these healthy pauses where like he'll say something, because he's always turning her down, of course, and then there'll be this moment of question as to what's going to happen next, and like a little bit of heavy breathing. It's just incredible. I really, really highly recommend it.
Very cool. Ken, is there anything else you wanted to bring up?
Oh yeah. So now that we covered a wide variety of ground. So QuakeCon.
Yeah, Quakecon.
things I am so excited for. So the meat sweats barbecue summer bonanza is coming next week with Graham, which is a new Fastnacht style event.
We're talking
Fallout 76.
Yeah, Fallout 76,
Yeah.
which Ian's not going to have much input on, but we've been playing. I don't know if you have the hankering to get back into a video game with really interesting character stories, Fallout's the game. So
I've been told.
Yeah,
It is because you can even listen to classic radio. There's a mod for both Fallout 3, 4,
Cool.
and New Vegas where you can add a classic radio station that plays radio drama. Like I would just roam the wasteland listening to the Twilight Zone or Lights Out, and it's a really cool experience.
Retrofuturism, all sorts of.
Yeah, it's that mod is
yeah.
on the Nexus, but that was one of my favorite mods, is to just listen to those shows while I'm roaming.
So, Fallout 76 is the game they released almost a year ago, back in the fall, and it got some tepid reactions. People were a little disappointed that it wasn't what they were hoping it was going to be, but they've Bethesda runs QuakeCon every summer, and they use that as a platform to make announcements about some of the other games. So what Ken's talking about is they just recently released some new information about some of the stuff coming out in the next few months.
Really quickly, did I overhear on our Discord, or I saw an image that seemed like it was a gaming company responding to criticism with an unparalleled honesty that I found admirable, not knowing the topic material?
Maybe. Yeah, I've seen some stuff get passed around. I don't. Let me look. I'm clicking through.
Yeah, it was like a document press release that basically said, everybody who's being a dick about our new game,
I think that's a meme.
It's a fake.
You.
Yeah, it's a fake. Yeah, it didn't actually come
shit.
from the company. Yeah.
It was so good it couldn't have been real.
Right.
Much like those I let a computer listen to commercials thing, which often I thought I bought hook, line, and sinker. Like, I don't know, it was like a Bob Ross painting episode, and they theorized that an AI watched such and such million hours of Bob Ross, and then it wrote its own episode, and the episode was about like I am the paint or something.
Sounds about right.
Have you guys seen these? Yeah.
Yeah. Have you seen the Harry Potter ones? The Harry Potter ones are really good too.
I'm gonna look that up immediately after.
Harry Potter written by AI. It's pretty good. It's pretty good. We'll have to pass those around on the Discord. So you were going to say, Ken, you were going to talk about some of the stuff coming out for Fallout 76.
Yeah. So it's interesting that you were talking about what people weren't happy with. By the time they drop Wastelanders, which is going to be November from what they said, it's going to change the game world completely into being more in line with other Fallout games. And when Jeff Gardner expanded on it, it's not just that they're introducing two factions, which from the earlier trailer and what they talked about previously at E3 is the Wastelanders coming back, the typical homesteader NPC types versus the Raiders. They're actually introducing more factions, one of which they mentioned was the Mothman cult,
yes.
which I think could have some interesting stuff going on in Lucky Hole Mine. If they expanded on that, I'd love to see where they take that. The other cool thing that they talked about was random encounters with NPCs, being able to have companions that don't just stay at camp, but you can go on quests with those companions that help to motivate your relationship with them, similar to previous Fallout games. The dialogue trees coming back with consequences and perk-based options.
Yeah, your high
charisma, or perception, and things like that.
I hope there's some low intelligence ones too.
Yeah, that would be awesome.
Those were some of the best, although they're a little bit breaking in that, like, in one moment you can have an intelligent conversation with an engineer, and then the next moment, whoever designed the next part of the game, like, and I'm thinking back specifically to Fallout 3, you can have like a conversation where you barely speak English correctly. You know, right?
You kill. Yeah, there's so by the time anybody plays it in November, it's going to be such a different experience than how we first started playing in beta, where you step out and there's kind of nothing at all except notes and holotapes. So the Wasteland experience is going to be way different. So I'm excited about that. More importantly, I'm excited about private servers, which Jeff Gardner didn't put a date to, but he did say it's coming sooner than you think.
Yeah. So and after the audience's reaction, I kind of expected them to backpedal a little bit and say, well, you know, it's one of those things we'll be working on sometime in the fall, hopefully. But then he like doubled down on it and he was like, actually, it's going to be sooner than you guys think. And
it's interesting because surprising. At E3, I think he had mentioned that, not Todd, that they've been pushing for it for a while now. They didn't say too much about it then. I think that opens up a lot of interesting doors as far as being able to create community-based factions of our own. The Fallout 5.0, some of the other people that I've played with and I'm good friends with have really strong communities that they have on Facebook where they do these NPC events of their own. Being able to have their own servers to create their own kind of dynamic interactions, to invite people in, is kind of a cool thing. I asked the people in our feed if they would be interested in playing in Chad's world.
Mm-hmm.
So we're actually we're going to make that happen.
That sounds great.
Jessica, and I are on PC along with a few other castmates. So we can create that whole experience for them.
We got to get Ian in here. He can help. He can help play out some of these made up storylines on the server.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, so it creates some really cool abilities that you can do when you have your own server, and you can kind of take it over and predictably do things.
Yeah, Ian, one of the things I did early on in this game is that I played my main character and got him leveled up and stuff. And then I was like, you know, I'm going to make another character that I can role play as on stream with other people. So I created Derek, who's like a good boy, good clean boy who leaves the vault into this madness of a world that's basically ended. And he's like overly optimistic and overly nice to people that you meet out in the world, and constantly trying to like befriend other people when you run into them, which is one of these things that randomly happens in the environment and doesn't happen all the time. And there's voice chat in the game, like localized voice chat. So you can say things like, hey buddy, hi, I'm Derek. Nice to meet you. And then he eventually developed other quirks, like there's instruments in the world. You can just like pick up a guitar and play it if it's like sitting around somewhere. There's also mouth harps, which are great. So the mouth harp is his favorite instrument, and he asks people regularly, hey, have you seen any mouth harps around? You want to jam? We could play some music. And people are like, no.
Yeah, right. Trying to kill some shit. Get out of my way.
Yeah, I'm min-maxing my character. I don't know what that means, but okay. See you later. Be safe.
Yeah. Okay, the be safe. That's what really sold me on it. That's why people play video games. My understanding, they play them to be safe.
Mm-hmm. Yep. There's some really scary big green guys out here. I would recommend staying away from them.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, that would be awesome. Just call it Chad server, Chadville.
Yeah.
Chad server.
Well, yeah, it would be a cool way for our fans to just come hang out and interact with people and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So is the way this works that like say I'm playing player X or character X, and you've got a private server going, would I just in there and then switch back out whenever I wanted to?
Yep.
Yeah.
You'd be able to get invited in and join in on someone in a world.
You're not stuck there or anything.
No. You can go out. You can go back to a general server. You could go wherever you want to log in and play.
Like Alex and Jessica are really good friends in real life. Chad and Susie, and I played with them. the other week, and they played in character. So just going around the wasteland with them, having arguments, and Chad being Chad, and Susie making fun of him, correcting him. It was fun to tag along.
Yeah,
with them,
also helps them to like get into their character some more too, I'm sure.
It does, yeah, because he came up with some one-liners that I ended up writing down as we went along.
Of course, yeah.
That I ended up using.
I remember, it's now a thing.
Like arguing with, he gets some stuff wrong. So one of the great ones was arguing with Chad is what was it? Arguing with Chad is like. Yeah, there it is. An uphill death rattle.
Ooh, I like that.
Instead of uphill battle. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's good.
Cool. So, Ken, I know you got to leave in a few minutes. Why don't we wrap this episode up? This has been awesome. So at the end of every episode, we do a little competition. I call it I lost the word. The word fell out of my honorific competition where we take who's most likely to whatever. So here's what I want you guys to do. You've got each of your shows and your main characters from your shows. So why don't we apply this to, one of your main characters, whoever you want to choose. And the question this week is, who's most likely to get a tattoo while drunk? And you gotta think through it and then come up with a justification for why your character would most likely get a tattoo while drunk. And last week, I'll give you a minute to think through this. Last week we did, so I'm a dummy. I didn't actually put the poll up on Twitter because I'm so busy with so many other things. But the question was, who's most likely to fall off a cruise ship? And it was me and Cornholio talking about, we were talking about Destiny and World of Warcraft. And I don't even remember what my argument was at the time. So I'll have to go back and listen to it. But I didn't put the poll up, so we don't actually have a winner on that one, unfortunately. So, all right. So this week, who's most likely to get a tattoo while drunk?
I'm bound and determined to win this one.
All right. Well, hit me.
All right. It has to be Chad. First of all, he's a typical bro.
Right.
He drinks copiously. And bros are known to get themselves into ridiculous situations anytime they get drunk. So he very easily would get drunk, go out, and wake up with a tattoo with someone's name that he doesn't even remember, or something just above his pelvis that says "Your mom was here."
I can imagine with a tramp stamp.
Yeah, or that too.
It's like a bet. Like, but you won't get a tramp stamp.
A tramp stamp has like that's a very physicalized image.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Is that it? Is that your argument?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
It's a solid one. It's solid.
No,
I don't
solid.
know if I can beat you on merits, but so the reason Corey would be most likely to get drunk and get a tattoo wouldn't be per choice. This is not the sort of thing that Corin's a meek guy. He mostly keeps to himself. He is almost constantly wasted, though. And he was not the kind of guy to wander in a tattoo shop tanked. He is very much the kind of guy who wakes up and a sorcerer has scrawled across his back something horrible that is going to turn him into, bring a demon out of his very own skin. This would absolutely happen to Corin on a not even particularly bad day. I don't think, again, not a guy who gets adventurous. He's more likely to nod out, and while he's nodded out, become the victim of a horrible experiment gone wrong that he probably wouldn't entirely solve.
Those both sound very legitimate. Having listened to both shows, I think that either one of them is completely likely. So this should be a close one. I hope people will chime in, having listened to the shows, to at least get a sense of who the characters are. Well, thank you guys for joining me. I know we got to break this up. We've been going a little bit long, but I really do appreciate hanging out. And this has been an awesome discussion talking about we
covered a lot of ground.
All the stuff.
We really did. This was okay.
PSAs to the human experience.
Right. I had high hopes for this. My hopes were not nearly as high as what met. Great time. Thank you guys very much.
Awesome. Yeah. Awesome. And so to wrap it up, where can the listeners get a hold of you and your shows?
Ken?
Follow 76podcast.com and on Facebook and Twitter with the same handle.
You can find Under the Shroud, Stitcher, Spotify, iTunes Music, or Apple Podcast. I believe we just launched on another platform, the name of which I'm forgetting. I'm at Fictional Ian on Twitter. Again, that's at Fictional Ian on Twitter. And I would love to interact with you guys. Drop myself and everybody else in Robots Radio a 5-star rating on iTunes, because if you don't, we'll find you.
That's right. We will find you. And I think we got some new ones, but we're running out of time. So if you do leave a review for Robots Roundtable, I'll try and make a note to read it out on the next show. And thank you to everybody who has left reviews and ratings. That is very, very helpful. And
thank you.
To get a hold of me,
you.
you guys know where I am, robotsradio.net for all the great shows. And you can check out my shows, the Fallout Lorecast or the Elder Scrolls Lorecast, or even things like Sleepy Time Stories, where I read stories from inside video games to help you fall asleep, which is strangely more popular than I ever believed it would become. It's kind of crazy.
I didn't know about that one, and I know you. Oh, God, my girlfriend's going to flip if I put that on. That's going to be great. I'm looking forward to it now.
Dude, the same coworker I mentioned played it for his wife, and she fell asleep. And then he came into work the next day, and he was like, hey, I just got to tell everybody that my wife fell asleep to Tom's voice last night. And I was like, I put your wife to bed last night, is what you're saying? Yeah, true story.
This does play directly into the self-serving nature. Like, that really, I think that is a morality tale. Right, that would have fit right into the Middle Ages.
All right, guys. Well, thanks for hanging out, and check out robotsradio.net for everything else. And we will see everybody next week. Have a good week.
See ya.
Later.
And we're done. And Chad had to go. Yep, Chad had to go.
Cool.
Yeah. So, yeah, if you get a chance to talk up the show, either on the show, on your podcast, or on social media, and just be like, you'll see my little thing. I'll put it up on Robots Radio of the, like the, what's it called? The poll where people can vote. And then you can pass that around. You can tell people, hey, go check out this episode of the show. I was on here, blah, 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 blah. So awesome. Thank you everybody for hanging out in chat and on Twitch and YouTube and wherever else you happen to be listening. We'll see you guys same time next week with a brand new show.